You think calling an empress beautiful is a death sentence? The entire celestial axis held its breath. I just grinned. Try divine. A dozen ion blades hissed from their sheaths until she rose from her throne of living crystal, her smile sharper than any weapon. A mortal's flattery is a fragile shield. The Empress of 1,000 Stars whispered, her voice weaving through the silence like a threat and a promise. But your spine is pure titanium. So, tell me, human, do you have the courage to turn that compliment into a courtship? Before we begin, if you enjoy tales where humanity stakes its claim on the cosmos with nothing but wit and a defiant heart, make sure to subscribe for more. The audience chamber of the Ethelgard Citadel was a symphony in motion, a cavernous space where floating pathways of light crisscrossed over bottomless drops into nebulae-fueled power cores. It was designed to humble, to intimidate, to make any supplicant feel like a speck of dust in the grand machinery of the Empire. And standing in the very center of this architectural marvel was Kalen Vance, freelance xenobotanist and occasional rogue, hands in the pockets of his worn flight jacket, looking for all the cosmos like he'd just won a tour he hadn't signed up for. Impressive, he muttered, eyeing the swirling energies around him. Bet the heating bill is a nightmare. The translation orb floating near his ear let out a distressed warble, broadcasting his comment to the assembled Valen High Court before it could automute, its lights blinking in what could only be described as mechanical embarrassment. All around him, the Valen nobles, their forms tall and elegant with skin that shimmered like captured starlight, stared in a silence so profound it was louder than any explosion. Humans were supposed to be respectful, timid. They were not. At the chamber's apex, seated upon the solarium throne, a seat carved from the heart of a dead sun, was Empress Seraphina of the Valen Dominion. Her hair was a cascade of spun silver, her eyes held the deep, shifting colors of a nebula, and the diadem on her brow was not a crown but a constellation of microsingularities, orbiting her head in a slow cosmic dance. She was majesty given form. She was the absolute end of a debate, and Kalen thought she was the most stunning thing he had ever seen. The herald's voice cut through the air, cold and precise. Envoy Kalen Vance of Terra, you stand in the presence of her luminescence, Empress of the Celestial Axis, Warden of the Singularity, First Voice of Vale. Kalen raised a hand, a casual, dismissive gesture. Yeah, got it. The list is long. Honestly, I'm probably gonna mix up a title or two before I'm done. How's it going, your luminescence? A wave of horrified shock washed through the nobles. The sentinels, armored in polished chromite, tightened their grips on their pulse pikes, the tips glowing a menacing crimson as they angled towards his chest. Seraphina did not move. Her expression was a masterpiece of neutral authority. You disregard protocol, son of Earth. Right, sorry about that, Kalen said, not sounding sorry at all as he adjusted the collar of his jacket. It's just, I figured if I waited for the formal invite, I'd be fossilized by the time I got to the point of this little visit. The court's murmur was a tidal wave of disapproval. The translator orb emitted a soft, pleading chime. Seraphina's head tilted a fraction of a degree, a spark of intrigue igniting in her nebula eyes despite her regal control. And what point is so urgent it defies a millennium of tradition? Kalen met her gaze, his own holding a glint of unshakable, foolish confidence. Just that the reports from your scouts? They were criminally lacking. You're not just beautiful, you're luminescence. You're a revelation. A silence fell, so heavy and complete it felt like the air had turned to glass. A noble's data slate slipped from their fingers, hovering frozen in the anti-grav field. One sentinel's armored foot shifted almost imperceptibly, a tell of pure astonishment. The very hum of the Citadel's core seemed to stutter. Kalen realized, with a sudden, thrilling clarity, that he might have just signed his planet's death warrant with a single, heartfelt observation. Seraphina's eyes narrowed, and the ghost of a smile touched her lips. You dare call your Empress a revelation? He shrugged, the easy grin not leaving his face. Dare, I call it a public service. An understatement, really? The chamber collectively forgot how to process oxygen. Then, against all odds and every law of imperial conduct, Seraphina laughed. It wasn't a quiet, controlled chuckle. It was a rich, unexpected sound that rolled through the hall, silencing the gasps it followed. Every courtier stood frozen, unsure if they should join in or call for the executioners. "Audacity," she said finally, the amusement clear in her melodic tone, "is a currency that can be spent only once in this court." Kalen's smirk widened. "Lucky for me, I'm here to make a deposit, not a withdrawal." The laugh came again, softer this time, more thoughtful. She leaned forward, her chin resting on a hand adorned with rings that glowed with inner fire. "And what do they call you, Terran?" "Mostly a problem," he said. "Sometimes that idiot. Depends on the day." Her cosmic eyes sparkled. "Then I decree this problem of Terra shall be my guest at the evening meal." The herald actually sputtered. "Your luminescence, the accord of first contact, the diplomatic, will adapt," she interrupted, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Prepare the Starlight Pavilion. My guest and I will dine alone." The sentinels moved with a confused rigidity, their programming conflicting with the unprecedented command. Kalen offered a lopsided, mock salute. "I'll try to remember which fork is for stabbing and which is for eating." As he was led away, the hall erupted into a cacophony of whispers. She laughed. "A private audience? No one has shared her table since the quelling of the Cygnus revolt." Kalen paid them no mind. He talked his way out of tighter spots. But as he glanced back, he saw her still watching him, her expression once again unreadable, but her eyes alight with a curiosity that felt like a victory. He had a feeling this was the biggest gamble of his life, and for the first time the potential payoff felt worth any cost. Outside the chamber, his Valen escort, a stern-faced commander, hissed, "You understand that no organic being has ever addressed her in such a manner and lived." Kalen grinned. "Guess I'm just full of firsts." Behind him, in the throne room of a billion judging eyes, the Empress of the Valen Dominion touched a finger to her lips where a true smile had briefly lived and whispered to the empty air, a revelation. How human. The Starlight Pavilion was not what Kalen had expected. He'd anticipated a stuffy dining hall, not an open-aired platform suspended in the void, shielded by a shimmering energy dome that offered a panoramic view of the galaxy's heart. Nebulae painted the darkness in great swathes of violet and gold, and nearby, a star being born pulsed with gentle light. The table was a single slice of obsidian set for two, with chairs that looked more like sculptures. Seraphina was already there, having changed from her formal regalia into a gown of deep blue that seemed to be woven from twilight itself, the tiny points of light within it mimicking the stars around them. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice softer without the chamber's echo. "You are prompt. I appreciate that in a problem. Didn't want to keep the most powerful woman in the sector waiting," he replied, sliding into the seat opposite her. "Heard it's bad for one's life expectancy." "It can be," she agreed, a playful glint in her eye. Servitors, sleek and silent, brought food that looked like captured light and wine that shimmered with contained energy. Kalen poked at a glowing, gelatinous sphere on his plate. "So, is this going to rewrite my DNA or just taste really good?" "A little of both, perhaps," Seraphina said, taking a delicate sip of her wine. "It is calibrated to your biology. I would not have my guest expire from poisoning. The court gossip would be unbearable." "We can't have that," he said and took a bite. It tasted like a thunderstorm feels. Electric, vibrant, and alive. "Wow. Okay, that's better than the rations I'm used to." They talked. Or rather, they fenced with words. She asked about Terra, about its unpredictable governments and its chaotic art. He described rock music that could shake buildings and paintings that looked like a child's messy dream, and she listened, truly listened, as if he were describing magic. "You speak of imperfection with such fondness," she noted, her gaze intense. "It's what makes us us," Kalen shrugged. "We're not polished. We're real. We break and we fix things. Sometimes we fix them wrong and make something even better. A philosophy of fortunate accidents," she mused. "It sounds terrifying." "It's called living," he said simply. Their eyes met across the star-filled abyss, and for a long moment, the only sound was the silent song of the cosmos. The space between them felt charged, thinner somehow. Then, a soft chime echoed, and a holographic message appeared over Seraphina's wrist. She sighed, the moment broken. Duty is a persistent suitor. Less fun than me, I hope, Kaelin said. She stood regal once more. We shall see. Until tomorrow, Kaelin Vance. He watched her go, her figure silhouetted against the birth of a star, and knew with absolute certainty that he was in very, very deep trouble. Back in his assigned quarters, which were still opulent enough to buy a small moon, Kaelin stared out the viewport. His comlink, a clandestine piece of tech sewn into his jacket, buzzed. A coded text from his actual employer scrolled across his inner lens. Status? Asset acquisition viable? He typed back a quick, truthful, and entirely unhelpful reply. Complications. The garden is more fascinating than the prize. He closed the link. The asset was a rare photosynthetic microbe rumored to be in the Citadel's biolabs. It was supposed to be a simple in-and-out job. But now, the Empress herself was the complication, and he found he didn't mind one bit. Meanwhile, in her private sanctum, Seraphina dismissed her attendants and stood before a vast window. The words echoed in her mind. A revelation. No one saw her. They saw the throne, the crown, the power. This human, this chaotic, infuriatingly charming man, looked at her and saw her. And he had the gall to name it. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. The summons came not from a guard, but from a floating, lotus-like drone that chimed softly outside his quarters at dawn. Her luminescence requests your presence in the echoing gardens. It intoned in a melodic, synthesized voice. Kaelin, who had been attempting to decipher the alien shower controls, emerged with a towel around his shoulders and a grin. A morning stroll? Is that before or after the daily plotting of galactic domination? The drone hovered, processing, its petals shifting in a pattern that might have been confusion. The Empress awaits. The echoing gardens were not a place of soil and chlorophyll, but a forest of crystalline trees that sang when the wind, or rather, the carefully calibrated atmospheric systems, passed through them. The sound was a low, haunting choir that vibrated in the bones. The path beneath his feet was made of light, and above, the sky was a fabricated twilight, with bioluminescent moths the size of his hand drifting lazily between the singing branches. Seraphina stood by a pool of liquid mercury that reflected not her image, but the swirling music of the trees themselves. She wore a simple, gray tunic and trousers, her silver hair bound back, the cosmic diadem absent. For the first time, she looked less like an empress and more like a scientist, a philosopher. You are late, she said, though her tone held no reproach. You try figuring out how to work a faucet that reads your biometrics and judges your hydration levels, he retorted, coming to stand beside her. It called me suboptimally saturated. A genuine, unguarded laugh escaped her, mingling with the crystal song. They are programmed for efficiency, not diplomacy. Sounds familiar, Kaelin quipped, earning a sidelong glance that was more amused than offended. They walked, the path of light unspooling before them. He noticed she matched her pace to his, a small, unconscious act that spoke volumes. Why am I here, your luminescence? Seraphina, she corrected softly. When the trees sing, titles feel cumbersome. Seraphina, he repeated, and her name felt like a secret on his tongue. Why am I here? You are a puzzle, Kaelin Vance. My advisors have provided dossiers. Kaelin Vance, Terran male, freelance xenobotanist, moderate risk, unorthodox methodologies. It does not explain you. It does not explain why you are here in my garden, instead of in a holding cell. He kept his expression neutral, the truth about the photosynthetic microbe feeling like a lead weight in his gut. Maybe your dossiers are as lacking as your scouts' reports. Perhaps, she conceded, stopping to run her fingers over the trunk of a singing crystal. The note it emitted was pure and clear. We Valens strive for perfection. Our records are flawless, our histories meticulously recorded. But they are sterile. You Terrans. You live in the messy, unrecorded moments, don't you? That's where all the best stuff happens, he said. The stuff that never makes the official record. She turned to face him fully, her nebula eyes searching his. Tell me one of your unrecorded moments. So he did. He told her about the time on Cygnus Beta, trapped in a dust storm, sharing the last of his water with a six-legged creature everyone else said was a pest. He described the way it had looked at him, a silent understanding passing between two living things in a hostile universe. It was a small story, meaningless in the grand scheme of empires. Seraphina listened as if he were reciting epic poetry. There is no tactical value in that story, she murmured. Its value isn't tactical. It's human. A group of nobles appeared on a distant floating platform, their elegant forms watching the scene with palpable disapproval. One, encounter on a data slate. Seraphina's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Lord Valerius, she said, her voice cooling by degrees. The council's eyes are ever watchful. Don't you ever get tired of being watched? Kaelin asked quietly. Her answer was a whisper. Every single moment of every single century. The walk ended too soon at the garden's edge. The regal mask was back. I have matters of state to attend to, she said, her voice formal once more. This was enlightening. Anytime. I've got a million of these useless stories. She paused, and just as she turned, she said, Meet me in the Ethelgard archives tomorrow. I wish to show you the weight of the history you so casually disregard. After she left, the singing of the crystals felt mournful. His escort, the same stern commander from the day before, was waiting. You walk with her as if you are her equal. Kaelin looked back at the shimmering garden, the memory of her laugh still hanging in the air. Maybe that's what she needs, he said, more to himself than to the guard. Someone who doesn't see a throne when they look at her. That night, in the deep watches, his comlink buzzed again. The client is impatient. Is the flora sample secured? Confirm extraction timeline. Kaelin stared at the message, his mind a whirlwind of crystal songs and nebula eyes. The microbe in the biolabs, the real reason for his infiltration, now felt like a betrayal. He typed a reply, his fingers heavy. Timeline uncertain. Security is tighter than anticipated. The primary asset is highly observant. He was stalling, and he knew it. Meanwhile, in the council chambers, Lord Valerius presented his recording to a semicircle of grim-faced elders. You see, he declared, his voice sharp with accusation. She strolls with him. She laughs with him. She allows him to speak her name. This human contagion is weakening her resolve, blurring the lines of sovereignty. The Cthar hegemony watches our borders, and our empress entertains a primitive. The image of Seraphina laughing in the crystalline garden played on a loop. The council murmured, their discomfort a tangible force in the room. Back in her chambers, Seraphina ignored the council's summons. She stood before a holographic star map, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking of a six-legged creature and a shared canteen of water in a storm. An act with no tactical value. An act of pure, illogical heart. And for the first time in a very long time, the weight of her crown felt unbearably, crushingly heavy. The next day, Kaelin entered the Ethelgard archives, a cavernous space where the entire history of the Valen Dominion was stored in glowing dataspheres that floated in a complex, silent ballet. Seraphina was waiting for him beside the central console, her expression unreadable. You asked about the weight of history, she began, her voice echoing slightly in the vastness. This is it. Every decision, every war, every life, recorded for eternity. She placed her palm on the console, and the spheres rearranged themselves, projecting scenes around them. The rise of the first empress, the war of silenced stars, the unification. It was a breathtaking, terrifying display of power and progress. It is perfect, she said, but her voice was hollow. It is flawless. Kaelin watched the grand narratives unfold, the epic battles and political masterstrokes. Then he looked at her, at the faint tension around her eyes. "I don't see you in any of this," he said quietly. "I see the Empress." "Where's Seraphina?" Her hand faltered on the console. The projections flickered. She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw not an empress, but a woman who was profoundly, utterly alone. Between the Terran smuggler and the alien empress didn't just crack. It began to crumble into dust. The silence in the archives stretched, thick and significant, broken only by the soft hum of the floating data spheres. Seraphina's hand fell from the console, and the grand projections of Valen history winked out, leaving them in the dim, ethereal light of the archive's core. She did not look away from him. "Seraphina is a component of the state," she said, her voice low and devoid of its usual imperial resonance. "Her wants are irrelevant. Her function is all." "That sounds like a fancy way of saying you're a prisoner in your own palace," Kalen replied, not moving, his gaze holding hers with an unnerving steadiness. He took a slow step closer. "What do you want, Seraphina?" "Not the Empress. You." The question seemed to physically strike her. She took a slight, involuntary step back, her nebula eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something akin to fear. No one had ever asked her that. Not in 5 centuries of rule. Her entire existence was a litany of duty, of strategic desire, of wants that served the Dominion. A personal want was a vulnerability, a flaw in the imperial diamond. She began, then stopped, her composure fracturing at the edges. She turned away from him, her silver hair a curtain against her expression. "You should not ask such questions." "Why?" "Because the answer is dangerous." He was beside her now, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, a stark contrast to the cool, controlled atmosphere of the archives. "Or because you're afraid of what the answer might be?" She spun back to face him, a flash of raw, undiluted emotion in her eyes, frustration, longing, anger. "You speak of things you cannot possibly understand. You come here with your human chaos, and you poke at foundations that have held for millennia. You think a few clever words can unravel the fabric of an empire." "I think," Kalen said softly, "that an empire that can't survive its ruler having a single personal thought wasn't very strong to begin with." He reached out, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His fingers gently brushed a stray strand of her silver hair, tucking it behind her ear. The contact was electric, a jolt of simple, profound intimacy in a world devoid of it. Seraphina froze, her breath catching. The simple touch was more invasive, more revolutionary than any declaration of war. It was just a man touching a woman, and it was utterly forbidden. She did not pull away. The moment hung between them, fragile and immense. Then the main archway of the archives hissed open, and Lord Valerius stood there, his indigo robes seeming to suck the light from the room. His sharp-featured face was a mask of cold fury. "Your luminescence," he said, the title dripping with venomous formality. "The High Council is convened. Your presence is required immediately. This distraction has gone on long enough." The spell shattered. Seraphina straightened, the Empress slamming back into place around her like a suit of armor. Her eyes, which had been so vulnerable moments before, hardened into chips of nebulae stone. "I am aware of my duties, Lord Valerius," she said, her voice ringing with absolute authority. She swept past Kalen without a second glance, but not before he saw the faint tremor in her hand she quickly hid in the folds of her gown. Valerius's gaze locked onto Kalen, promising silent, certain retribution. The audience with the High Council was a trial in all but name. Kalen was not invited, but he felt its reverberations through the citadel. The whispers grew sharper, the looks from passing courtiers more hostile. He was no longer a curious oddity, he was a threat. That evening, as Kalen was attempting to decode the menu of his food synthesizer, which kept offering him nutrient-dense emotional stabilizer paste, the door to his quarters slid open without a chime. Seraphina stood there. She had changed back into the simple gray tunic, a hood pulled over her distinctive hair. "Come with me," she said, her voice tight with urgency. Leave the translator. He didn't hesitate. He followed her out into the corridor, which was mysteriously empty of guards and drones. She led him through a series of service passages he never knew existed, descending deep into the citadel's underbelly. The polished surfaces gave way to rough-hewn rock and throbbing energy conduits. This was the machine that powered the majesty above. Finally, they emerged onto a small, dark observation platform jutting out over a colossal natural cavern. Below, a river of pure, molten crystal flowed, casting a dazzling, shifting light across the cavern walls. The air hummed with raw, untamed power. It was the opposite of the controlled elegance upstairs. This was the Empire's wild, beating heart. "This is the primordial flow," Seraphina said, her voice barely a whisper over the roar. "The source of our power. It is the first thing a new empress is shown, and the last thing she sees before her consciousness is uploaded to the archives." She turned to him, her face illuminated by the chaotic, beautiful light from below. "You asked me what I want." She took a deep breath. "I want to feel the rain you described. I want to taste this coffee. I want to hear music that makes a crowd cry. I want to know what it is to have a moment that is not recorded, that is not perfect, that is just mine." She was giving him her truth, naked and unguarded. It was the most valuable thing in the galaxy. Kalen looked at her, this goddess of 1,000 worlds standing in a cave, wishing for the messy imperfections of a backwater planet. He didn't speak. He simply closed the distance between them, his hand coming up to cradle her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. He looked into her eyes, a silent question. Her answer was a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision of two worlds, a release of pent-up tension, a promise and a rebellion all at once. Her hands came up, clutching the fabric of his jacket, pulling him closer as if he were an anchor in a stormy sea. The molten crystal roared beneath them, a fitting symphony for the cataclysm happening on the ledge above. When they finally broke apart, breathless, the citadel felt different. The very air had changed. Seraphina rested her forehead against his, her eyes closed. "They will try to destroy you for this," she whispered. "Let them try," Kalen murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere." Back in his quarters hours later, the reality of the situation settled on him. The microbe, his original mission, was now a ticking bomb. If he stole it and was caught, it would validate every accusation Valerius had. It would shatter the fragile trust he had just built with Seraphina. His comlink buzzed again, more insistent this time. "Final warning. Extract the sample or the contract is void. Consequences for failure will be severe." He deleted the message. He was in too deep. The prize was no longer in the biolabs. It was in the Empress's private chambers, in the secret cave, in the way she had kissed him like he was the only real thing in her universe. He was a smuggler who had come to steal a trinket and was now stealing the heart of an empress. It was the worst, most magnificent plan he had ever had. Meanwhile, in the council chamber, Lord Valerius reviewed the security footage. The cameras in the service tunnels were mysteriously offline, but he had his own sources. A low-level tech, hands trembling, handed him a single grainy thermal image taken from a remote sensor in the cavern. It showed two figures close, their heat signatures merged into one. Valerius allowed himself a thin, cold smile. He had his proof. The human's gallantry had just signed his own death warrant, and quite possibly, begun the end of Seraphina's reign. The summons that came for Kalen the next morning was not from a Lotus drone, but from a full squad of sentinels, their pulse pikes held at a ready position that was anything but ceremonial. Their commander, the same stern-faced Valen from before, did not meet his eyes. "The High Council demands your presence, Terran." Immediately, Kalen's heart hammered against his ribs, but he kept his face a mask of casual insolence. "What, no breakfast first? Your hospitality is really slipping." The walk to the council chamber was a silent, grim procession through corridors that felt suddenly colder. The usual hum of the citadel seemed muted, as if the entire structure was holding its breath. He knew. They knew about the cavern, about the kiss. He had gambled the galaxy on a moment of feeling alive, and now the bill was due. The council chamber was a circular, tiered room of polished black stone, lit from below so that the faces of the 12 council members were cast in severe, dramatic shadows. Lord Valerius stood at the center, a predator who had finally cornered his prey. Seraphina sat upon a raised dais in a throne of dark metal, her face an unreadable masterpiece of imperial composure. But Kaelin saw it, the faint, almost invisible tremor in the fingers that rested on the armrest, the tightness around her magnificent eyes. She was terrified. For him, Kaelin Vance of Terra. Valerius's voice cut through the silence like a blade. You stand accused of high treason against the Valen Dominion, of sedition, of attempting to corrupt and manipulate the sovereign for your species' gain. He gestured, and the grainy thermal image from the cavern bloomed in holographic life above them. The two merged figures were unmistakable. A wave of hissed outrage swept through the assembled observers. This defilement, Valerius spat, is a stain upon our empire's honor. What say you to these charges? Kaelin looked from Valerius's triumphant face to Seraphina's stoic mask. He could lie. He could claim it was a misunderstanding, a moment of human foolishness. But looking at her, he found he couldn't. The truth was the only thing he had left to give her. He shrugged, the same infuriating, easy gesture that had first caught her attention. I'd say your thermal imaging could use an upgrade. But the charges? Guilty as charged. The chamber erupted. Seraphina's composure cracked for a single, heart-stopping second, her eyes widening in a silent plea for him to stop. Valerius looked momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity of the confession. You admit your guilt? I admit I kissed her, Kaelin said, his voice rising above the din, clear and unafraid. I admit I find her more fascinating than any star in your dominion. I admit that calling her your luminescence feels wrong when all I see is Seraphina. If that's treason, then I'm a traitor. But corrupt her? Manipulate her? He laughed, a short, sharp sound. You're the ones who've locked her in a gilded cage for 5 centuries. I just showed her the key. Valerius's face contorted with rage. This human filth condemns himself with his own words. The penalty for this treason is execution. Sentinels, take him to the... Enough! The word was quiet, but it carried the weight of a collapsing star. Every head turned to the dais. Seraphina rose. She was no longer the terrified woman from moments before. She was every inch the Empress, her power radiating from her in a palpable wave. You forget yourself, Lord Valerius, she said, her voice dangerously soft. You pronounce sentences in my court. You do not command my sentinels. Your luminescence, the law is clear. I am the law, the declaration echoed, final and absolute. She descended the steps of the dais, her gaze sweeping over the stunned council. This man, this human filth, has shown more courage and honesty in his short time here than this entire council has in its collective existence. You speak of corruption? You, who plot in shadows and trade in fear. You speak of defilement? The only thing he has defiled is your precious, suffocating notion of perfection. She stopped before Kaelin, turning her back on the council in a gesture of supreme, breathtaking defiance. She looked at him, and for the first time in front of them all, she let them see the truth in her eyes, the affection, the respect, the raw, unvarnished connection. You asked me what I wanted, she said to him, her voice meant only for him, yet heard by all. I want this. Then she turned back to the council, her voice ringing out, destined to be broadcast across the empire. The charges are dismissed, and by my authority as Empress, I declare Kaelin Vance of Terra not a prisoner, not an envoy, but my official consort-elect. The silence that followed was beyond profound. It was the sound of a universe being rewritten. Valerius looked as if he had been physically struck. Nobles gasped, some fainting outright. The sentinels looked at each other in utter confusion, their weapons lowering uncertainly. Kaelin could only stare at her, his brain struggling to catch up. Consort-elect? She had not just saved him. She had publicly claimed him. She had tied her fate to his in front of the entire galaxy. It was the boldest, most insane, most magnificent thing he had ever witnessed. The courting, Seraphina announced, a faint, triumphant smile finally touching her lips, will commence immediately. The uproar that followed was of historic proportions. But Seraphina paid it no mind. She offered her hand to Kalen, not the hand of an empress to a subject, but the hand of a woman to the man she had chosen. He took it, his fingers lacing with hers. As they walked together from the council chamber, leaving a wake of political chaos behind them, he leaned close. Consort-elect? You do realize I have no idea what that entails, right? She squeezed his hand, her nebula eyes sparkling with a light he had put there. It entails, my reckless human, that you are now stuck with me. He grinned. The weight of the moment, the danger, the sheer absurdity of it all, filling him with a wild, defiant joy. Yeah, he said, looking at the woman who had just shattered an empire's traditions for him. I can live with that. Behind them, in the shattered silence of the council chamber, Lord Valerius watched them go, his face a stone mask of fury. But beneath the rage, a cold, calculating plan began to form. The Empress had just declared war on tradition. He would simply have to provide her with a real one. The human had survived the day. The Citadel, in the wake of Seraphina's declaration, became a pressure cooker of silent scandal and roaring gossip. The title Consort-elect was not just unprecedented. It was a seismic shock to the Valen political landscape, a landscape that had been frozen in perfect, orderly ice for millennia. Kalen found his quarters upgraded to a suite adjacent to the Empress's own private wing, a sprawling complex of rooms with a view of the galactic core that was almost as breathtaking as she was. His every move was now shadowed by a new detail of sentinels, not as guards, but as a protective entourage, their loyalty directly to Seraphina, their expressions a mixture of confusion and newfound respect. The stern-faced commander, who introduced himself as Commander Terran, now spoke to him with a gruff formality that bordered on deference. Your schedule, Consort-elect. Her luminescence has arranged for your acclamation. The acclamation was a brutal crash course in Valen court life that made navigating an asteroid field seem relaxing. There were tutors on protocol, history, and the complex, unspoken language of the noble houses. Kalen endured it with a grin and a subversive wit that left his instructors flustered. When a protocol droid insisted he master 7 different bows for 7 different ranks of nobility, Kalen had asked, "What's the bow for the guy who doesn't give a damn?" The droid had short-circuited. His first official public appearance as Consort-elect was at the Ceremony of Aligned Stars, a ritual to honor a new trade pact with the mineral-rich Glyphon conglomerate. He stood beside Seraphina's throne, feeling the weight of 1,000 hostile stares. She was resplendent in robes of state, but her hand, hidden from view, found his and gave it a quick, reassuring squeeze. When the Glyphon ambassador, a hulking being of crystalline rock, presented a gift of pulsating ore, the herald announced the traditional response. The Empire accepts your offering, and its light shall be added to our own. But before Seraphina could speak, Kalen, remembering a story from his xenobotany days, stepped forward slightly. The crystal structure is incredible, he said, his voice carrying in the silent hall. Formed under the pressure of a dying red giant, right? Must have taken millennia to achieve that lattice. It's not just an offering. It's a piece of history. Thank you for sharing a fragment of your world's story with us. The Glyphon ambassador, who had been prepared for cold formality, let out a low, grinding sound of profound pleasure. You perceive the song within the stone, Consort-elect? I can appreciate the effort it took to make it, Kalen said with a genuine smile. The ambassador bowed, deeper than protocol required. The entire court watched, stunned. It wasn't the correct response. It was better. Later, in her private solar, Seraphina turned to him, her eyes alight. Do you have any idea what you did? The Glyphons value artistry above all else. You have just secured their loyalty for a generation with a single, honest observation. I just said what I saw, he shrugged, pouring himself a glass of water from a carafe that chimed as it filled. It's what I do. It is what I need, she corrected softly, coming to stand before him. They see a upstart human. I see a key to locks I did not even know existed. Their moments of true privacy were stolen and precious. He finally managed to synthesize a crude facsimile of coffee from the Citadel's molecular assemblers. He brought her a cup in her strategy room, where she was poring over star charts. She sipped the dark, bitter liquid, her face contorting for a moment before a look of dawning understanding crossed her features. It is chaotic and stimulating. It makes my senses feel awake. Told you, he said, grinning, alive. She set the cup down and kissed him, the taste of coffee on her lips a new, intoxicating spice. It was in these moments that the gulf between them vanished, leaving only the heat of two people falling into the gravitational pull of one another. But the idol was fragile. Lord Valerius was not idle. The opposition coalesced around him, a faction of traditionalists who called themselves the Stellar Preservation. They did not openly defy the Empress, that was suicide, but their resistance was a cold, insidious thing. They delayed reports, misplaced vital communications, and spread whispers through the court data streams. The human is a destabilizing agent. His influence makes her weak, emotional, unpredictable. The Cthar hegemony mobilizes its fleets while our Empress sips bitter water with her pet. Kalen felt the walls closing in. His comlink had gone silent. His mysterious employer had clearly written him off as a lost cause. He was now truly, utterly on his own, his survival tied entirely to the woman beside him. The breaking point came during a tactical briefing on the Cthar threat. Valerius presented a plan for a preemptive strike, a flawless, brutal piece of military logic that would wipe out a Cthar border world as a demonstration of resolve. The council murmured its approval. It was the Valen way. Overwhelming, perfect, merciless force. Seraphina listened, her face impassive. Then she turned to Kalen. Consort-elect. Your assessment. Every eye in the room turned to him, filled with contempt and curiosity. Kalen looked at the hologram of the Cthar world, a planet of harsh beauty, home to billions. He thought of shared canteens in dust storms. He thought of the value of a single, meaningless act of kindness. It's a stupid plan, he said flatly. The room went dead silent. Valerius sneered. And the primitive has a better one? You blow up their world. You make martyrs, Kalen said, stepping into the holographic display. You unite every single Cthar under a banner of hatred against you. You win a battle and guarantee a war that will last for generations. He pointed to the resource reports scrolling alongside the tactical data. They're militarizing because they're desperate. Their primary star is destabilizing. They're not looking for a fight. They're looking for a new home, and you're the biggest landlord in the neighborhood. He looked at Seraphina. So you don't give them a war. You give them an offer. You have the technology to stabilize stars. Offer to help fix theirs. In exchange, they become a protectorate, not a slave state. You get a loyal ally on your border, and you don't have to slaughter a planet full of beings who are just scared. The silence that followed was different from the others. It was the silence of a paradigm shifting. It was reckless, it was unproven, it was utterly, profoundly human. It was the opposite of perfection. It was a gamble on empathy. Seraphina looked from Kalen's determined face to Valerius's outraged one. She saw the past and the future, laid out before her in a stark, simple choice. A choice between the flawless, cold logic of Empire and the messy, hopeful heart of the man she loved. She stood. The Consort-elect's analysis has merit. The preemptive strike is cancelled. Draft a diplomatic overture to the Cthar hegemony. We will offer them aid. The council was too stunned to even protest. As they filed out, Valerius shot Kalen a look of pure, undiluted hatred. The human had not just challenged his authority. He had challenged the very soul of the Valen Dominion. And he was winning. That night, as Kalen and Seraphina stood together on their private balcony, watching the fleet movements change on the star chart from attack formations to peaceful envoys, she leaned her head against his shoulder, whispered, I hope it's for the better, he replied, holding her close. It is, she said with absolute certainty. It is for us. But in the shadows of the citadel, Lord Valerius met with his most loyal followers. The time for whispers and political maneuvering was over. The human's influence had grown too great, his ideas too dangerous. If the Empress would not see reason, then she would have to be made to see. The preservation of the Empire, he told them, demanded it. The storm was no longer gathering. It was about to break. The storm broke not with a declaration of war, but with the silent, coordinated flicker of lights. Kalen was in the strategy room, reviewing the first cautiously optimistic response from the Cthar, when the holographic star charts dissolved into static. The gentle hum of the Citadel's systems stuttered and died, plunging the room into an emergency-lit crimson gloom. The door hissed shut and sealed with a finality that echoed through the sudden silence. Lockdown. This wasn't a system failure. It was a coup. Commander Theron's voice crackled over Kalen's newly issued private comm, strained and punctuated by the distant sizzle of energy fire. Consort-elect. Valerius's faction has seized primary control. They've overridden the core command. The Sentinels loyal to the Empress are engaged in the central spire. I cannot reach her. She is in her. The transmission dissolved into a burst of static. Seraphina. She was in her private sanctum, the most secure location in the Citadel, which now made it the most perfect trap. Kalen's mind, usually a whirlwind of sarcasm and improvisation, went cold and sharp. He was a smuggler, not a soldier. His skills were in talking his way past guards, not fighting through them. But for her, he would learn. He remembered the service tunnels she had shown him, the Citadel's secret veins. The main corridors would be choked with hostile sentinels. The underbelly was his only chance. He pried open a ventilation shaft, the memory of her leading him through the darkness his only map. The climb was a nightmare of tight spaces and echoing shouts from the main thoroughfares. He could hear the pitched battle raging, the distinctive whine of loyalist pulse pikes against the deeper thrum of the traitors' weapons. He moved through the dripping, conduit-lined darkness, the raw power of the primordial flow a dull roar beneath his feet, a chaotic heartbeat for the chaos above. He finally emerged into a service corridor behind the sanctum's main antechamber. The scene was one of controlled pandemonium. A handful of Seraphina's personal guard, led by Theron, were pinned behind a barricade of overturned consoles, trading fire with a superior force of Valerius's rebels who were methodically advancing. And there, in the center of it all, was Seraphina. She was not cowering. She stood before the sealed doors of her sanctum, a small, elegant ion pistol in her hand, her face a mask of furious, regal defiance. She fired with precise, cold accuracy, dropping a rebel who got too close. She was an empress fighting for her throne. But in her eyes, Kalen saw the woman from the cavern, fighting for her life, for their future. Then he saw Valerius. He emerged from the rebel lines, clad in ornate combat armor, a heavy plasma rifle in his hands. "It is over, Seraphina," he shouted, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Your reign of human-influenced sentiment ends tonight. The Empire will be returned to strength and purity." "You speak of purity while bathing in treason, Valerius," she yelled back, her voice steady despite the blaster bolts searing the air around her. "This empire is mine, and I will not surrender it to your fear." Valerius raised his rifle, aiming not at her guards, but directly at her. A regrettable necessity. Time seemed to slow. Kalen didn't think. He acted. He burst from the service corridor, not with a soldier's charge, but with a smuggler's desperate lunge. He didn't have a weapon. He had the only thing that had ever truly mattered here, his presence. "Hey, Valerius!" he roared. The Lord turned, his aim faltering for a split second, his face a caricature of hatred and surprise. It was all the distraction Seraphina and Theron needed. Theron laid down a blistering volley of covering fire. In that frozen moment, Kalen's eyes met Seraphina's. He saw the terror for him, the dawning hope, the fierce, unbreakable love. He gave her a small, lopsided grin, a final piece of their shared, reckless heart. Then Valerius, with a snarl of rage, swung his rifle back towards the greater threat, the unarmed human who had stolen his victory. The world exploded in white-hot pain as a plasma bolt meant for Seraphina grazed Kaelin's shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The smell of seared flesh filled his nostrils. But the sacrifice had worked. The delay allowed Seraphina's guards to gain the upper hand. Terran tackled Valerius, and the fight was over as quickly as it had begun. Seraphina was at Kaelin's side in an instant, her hands on his face, her eyes wide with panic. "Kaelin, I'm okay," he gritted out, the pain a fiery brand. "Just a scratch. Really? Adds to my roguish charm, don't you think?" She let out a sob that was half laugh, half cry, and kissed him fiercely, heedless of the blood, the smoke, the watching eyes. In that kiss was everything: relief, love, and a promise sealed in fire. The coup collapsed with Valerius in chains. The sight of the Empress fighting alongside her guards, and the human consort-elect taking a blast meant for her, was a story that spread through the Citadel faster than any rebel transmission. It wasn't a story of perfect, distant power. It was a story of loyalty, courage, and heart. It was a story that changed everything. A solar cycle later, Kaelin stood on the same balcony, his arm in a sling, the shoulder still tender. Below, in the grand plaza of the capital, a crowd of Valen's citizens had gathered, not for a somber imperial address, but for something the Empire had never seen. Seraphina stood beside him, not on a distant dais, but at the railing, close to her people. She wore a simple diadem, and her hand was firmly clasped in his. "People of the Valen Dominion," she began, her voice amplified but warm, personal. "For too long we have prized perfection over progress, control over connection. We believed our strength lay in our flawless logic, our unassailable power." She looked at Kaelin, her love for him plain for all to see. "But a son of Earth, a man of chaos and heart, taught me a different truth. Our greatest strength is not in being untouchable, but in what we are willing to touch, in what we are willing to feel, in the connections we are willing to risk." She raised their joined hands. "The Cthar hegemony is now our ally. The Glyphons are our friends. Our empire is not weaker for it. It is stronger, more vibrant, more alive. This is the new way, a way of courage, not just of conquest, a way of heart alongside logic." The cheer that erupted was not the reverent silence of old, but a roaring, messy, human-like wave of sound. It was the sound of an empire waking up. Later, as the first true, unengineered rain in centuries began to fall on the Citadel's external sensors, Kaelin and Seraphina stood together, watching the water streak the viewport. She leaned against him. "You called me a revelation," she whispered. "But you, Kaelin Vance, you are the revolution." He held her close, the smuggler who had stumbled into a throne room and ended up helping to reshape the stars. He had come for a microbe and found a universe. And as he kissed the Empress of 1,000 worlds, he knew that the most beautiful thing in any galaxy was not perfection. It was this. It was them. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories where humanity changes the stars with nothing but courage and heart, make sure to subscribe for more.